like you. It's not just storytelling, it's complete entertainment. PBS Hawaii. Home is here.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work. Hawaii's state legislature is comprised of 25 members in the Senate and 51 in the House of Representatives. It's part-time, with lawmakers meeting for just 60 days out of the year during a regular session. Is that enough time for elected officials to govern and make decisions on complex issues? Should Hawaii's state legislature be full-time, meeting throughout the year? What do you think? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. Every year, the Hawaii State Legislature convenes in mid-January and runs through late April or early May. Lawmakers are restricted to a 60-day session, which limits their influence most of the year and forces many critical decisions to be made under deadline pressure. Proposals have been introduced for lawmakers to meet on a more continuous basis. Supporters say this would allow for more time to study bills and increase transparency. But opponents are concerned about cost and altering the current identity of being a citizen legislature. Our panel will discuss the pros and cons tonight. We look forward to your participation in our show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Republican Representative Gene Ward is the minority policy leader in the State House. Elected in 2006, he represents District 18, which includes Port Locke, Hawaii Kai, and Kalama Valley. He's also a Vietnam veteran who served as a translator and interpreter. Stanley Chang was elected to the State Senate in 2016 after serving 4 years on the Honolulu City Council. The Democratic senator represents a wide area of East Honolulu that runs from Kapuhulu to Hawaii Kai. Prior to serving in office, he practiced law, specializing in real estate law. Democratic Senator Joy San Buenaventura represents the district of Puna. Prior to being elected to the Senate, she served in the State House. She grew up on Oahu but has lived on Hawaii Island for the last 30 years. She is a lawyer and a former judge and is also an avid photographer. And Judith Wong is the vice president of the League of Women Voters of Hawaii. The nonpartisan political organization works to improve our systems of government and impact public policies through citizen education and advocacy. Thank you all for being here tonight. We are excited to dive into this topic. Representative Ward, I want to start with you. What do you think the advantages are of having the legislature run in the time frame that it does as is?
I thought you could say what are the disadvantages, because I'm not really a strong advocate of doing it, but the advantages, I think, are assumptions that, hey, we're going to be more thorough in our analysis of legislation. But case in point, 70% of the people want term limits, and we rejected it. My point is the argument, the way we structure our time, it's not about the time, it's the way we structure it. And if you remember, and I know we have some chairs here, I can kill a bill anytime I want, which means legislation rises and falls based upon one or two individuals. So the structure of the legislature, and I don't want to say, but I will say, the person who said that, who bragged about it, is in jail right now because it was the bribery. My point is this: time expands or contracts depending on how much time you have to accomplish an issue. We can go faster or slower depending on how much is available. So if we do longer, I mean, it's like the legislative branch on steroids. And I think we're supposed to be equal branches. We're not supposed to overpower them. So some of the things that are happening, I think we will have a good discussion on. But just so you know, my cards are on the table. As you can see, I have nothing to say about being against the particular issue. But it's a pleasure to be here and to say that I think there's a lot of people out there who say you're going to cause your $25 million a year of the cost of the legislature to go to $75 million, and your salary is going to go to, what do we make, Stanley? $72,000? You're going to go to $140,000? I don't think taxpayers are ready for that.
Senator Chang, what are your thoughts? What would be the advantage to going year-round?
I don't think the lawmaking process should be a race. I think it should be deliberative. But the reason we can't be deliberative today, the reason why often a small number of individuals within the legislature have the power to kill bills, often without recourse until the next year, is because we live in a system with so many artificial deadlines. We have to introduce all of our bills by late January, as though no issues ever come up in the state of Hawaii after January. Every week that goes by is another series of deadlines at which thousands, hundreds, dozens of bills will not make it. And frankly, I would say most cases, working with my colleagues, I find that when bills die, it's usually not a nefarious situation, but simply that there isn't enough time to work out something that's agreeable to all the parties. And I have served on the Honolulu City Council, where there was a continuous session, essentially. And we always had the luxury of saying, you know what, it looks like there's some disagreement now. Why don't the stakeholders take the time to confer and come back to us next month with language that we can all live with? And I saw that process, work really well at the City Council. We just don't have that luxury at the legislature, and that's my biggest concern.
Senator San Buenaventura, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you find yourself?
So I find myself, again, Stanley Chang, surprisingly on this
we're
issue.
on the side.
Well, the reality is we are citizen legislators. And I ran for office because I did not like politicians being professional legislators who have no concept of what it is to be working as a working citizen. Okay, when I came in, they had no idea that there was no what we call a qualified.
We're having an audio issue, so I want you to hold that thought. And while they fix that, I'm going to pivot over to Judith, and we'll get back to you because I want to hear what you have to say, but I want to have the audience hear it as well. So they're going to fix your mic, and we'll get right back to you. But while they're taking care of that audio issue, and I do apologize for that, Judith, when we look at this, we think about all the bills that are introduced at the beginning of session and then all the ones that die, what Senator Chang was talking about. Is that a good metric for how productive the legislature is? Is that how we should be sort of measuring their success?
I think it's one of the metrics that we might take a look at as understanding whether we're being successful or not. But I think that one of the points that Senator Chang has brought up, the idea that you don't have time to come back and say, research this, see how it will fit with other bills, bring this back in, because the deadlines are so vicious. And having been a teacher, I recognize that deadlines do focus the mind, but we've seen just a cascade of stops that prevent bills from going forward, that prevent good bills from going forward. So I think there is some advantage to the longer, less compressed approach to being able to consider the bills.
Okay, well, we want to come back to you now. They did fix your mic, so I apologize for that. There were some audio issues in the back, but let's start that again. You were saying that you disagree with Senator Chang. Why is that?
Like I said, I came into the office because I wanted to make sure that the legislator knew what a working person goes through every day regarding the laws that come in. And I disagree with both of them because we have bills that come all the time, the same bills being deliberated over. And what the fallacy of the part-time legislature is that we don't work full-time. The reality is we do work full-time.
Amen.
Okay, the 60 days is the session. The rest of the 9 months or 10 months is we are out in the field talking to our constituents to know what it is that they need. I live in Puna. It takes me 4 hours round trip to go to my home to the state capitol. If you are secluding me from my constituency by making me stay in the state capitol the entire year, I am not representative of my district. I do not know what their day-to-day problems are. if you prevent me from going to these forums on the national level to find out what is working on the other states, I am less effective as a legislator to let my colleagues know what has worked in other states that we should learn from. So I disagree with them, because bills do come back if it is a good bill, and bad bills should die. And if you look at the hundreds of bills that come in, like 3/4 of them are duplicative. And a lot of them are pieces of other bills that really needed to be combined. We do not need hundreds of these bills to go through. We need good bills to go through. And a lot of the times, if you look at some of the bills, it's working groups, because we have informal and formal working groups. In fact, I have already started talking about having informal working groups to see what we can do about reducing the population in the state hospital, where 70% of the population there do not need to be there, especially with the overcrowding and the safety problems we have with the employees. We want to make sure that they are safe. The bills that are coming about does not address this issue, because they do not know the day-to-day problems of the prosecutor and the public defender refusing to file the motions necessary to get the 70% out of the state hospital and back into the system. Okay. That is why we need to have the 9-month deliberative process. That's only one. The other one, of course, that I'm working on is the social worker child abuse issues that we've been hearing about. We hear only what the advocates and the social workers, when we go into session, what they want us to hear. What we really need to know are what the day-to-day social workers face every day. And on the Big Island, where we are faced with 4-hour round-trip visits by a social worker to a case site, and especially where children are split up, we are seeing overworked social workers who are unable to see the kind of abuse that we need them to see. And why is it that we're not having the vacancies filled up? All we're hearing are from the bureaucrats why they can't fill the vacancies. We need to go there on the streets to find out why it is that people are refusing to fill in applications and stay in their jobs. So these are the kinds of things that we as legislators are supposed to be doing with the 9 months, that we are not stuck in the square building doing what the various advocates want us to do, and not knowing what the day-to-day people really need us to learn.
Representative Ward, I heard you say amen when she said that it's a full-time job.
And I love what the League of Women do, the
Judith.
League of Women Voters do. I love what you guys do. But I think from what she said, the implication is if we have a full-time legislature, we're going to have the lobbyists coming out of our offices left, right, front, and center. Right now, they're a very important part. We all know that they educate us, they twist our arms sometimes. Sometimes they don't do much of anything other than be there, but being their presence is important. So to give legislators more time to have more special interests brought into the sessions, I don't think is a good thing. Again, when are you a lobbyist at the League of Women Voters?
I testify. I'm not a lobbyist.
Could you imagine testifying 12 months out of the year?
Well, that's one of the questions I have, is how this would affect. Actually, at some point I want to go back to how it affects the representatives from the other islands, but also how it would affect all of the departments, the DOE, the DOT, the public service, all of them. Right now, when you're in session, it seems like they are up there every single day, testifying, answering questions, participating in the process. That's time that they're not back in their office doing what you charge them to do. So I wonder, and maybe you can address this, whether this process would perhaps make it easier on them by spreading out those obligations, or whether it would actually add to their burden by calling them to be there on a constant basis. And we haven't really, we haven't really heard from you about how you would see that. I presume you don't mean that people would be here 100% of the time all year long, but that they would meet regularly throughout the year.
But required only once a month, if I can chime in.
Well, Senator,
Yes.
Senator Chang, please,
Yes.
please clarify for us.
Yeah, so I think that's right, Judith. I think we all share the same goals, that representatives be closely attuned to their districts, and also ordinary members of the public, and not just the paid lobbyists of the special interests, have access to the building. The problem now is that with 72 or 48 hours in the House, or now 24 hours notice for our conference committee hearings, most ordinary people will never be able to weigh in. And that's why the lobbyists are often the only voices that we hear, the lobbyists and the state agencies. So by offering, greater notice, like the county councils who offer 6 days notice, that gives the members of the public greater time to submit testimony, to weigh in. The county councils who operate on this year-round session can hold their meetings at any time. They meet usually once or twice a month. They have an off week, and then they come back for committee hearings. So they have a much greater flexibility. When I was on the city council, it convened not just here in urban Honolulu, but also in Kapolei at Kapolei HAWAIʻI. So there's just a much greater flexibility to schedule the calendar such that you wouldn't be in downtown Honolulu 52 weeks out of the year, but maybe only half of the weeks out of the year. So somebody like a neighbor island legislator during the session has to fly to Honolulu every single week, whereas under a continuous session could fly to Honolulu once or twice a month, and just have a couple of days of meetings and have the rest of their time to spend in their districts, in their other careers if they so choose. Now, the way that the legislature is currently scheduled, we kind of disappear into a black hole from January through May. And maybe there are some employers that would be okay with that kind of a part-time schedule, but our counterparts on the county councils who have this spread out year-round schedule, many of them can and do have second jobs as well, because maybe if you miss 4 days a month, or 4 days a month are going into your county council or legislative job, that still leaves you with the rest of the month to complete your duties. And so I think it really depends on how the calendar is scheduled, and I certainly would not be the one arguing for 2,000 hours every single business day of the year that the legislature would be in session.
I want to bring in the audience, and Senator, I'd love for you to take this one. This is from Nikos in Aliamanu, who says, a full-time legislature could provide more routine and exacting oversight of executive department spending and operations, now viewed and depicted as bullying in Hawaii's stale political culture. How can this happen under current time and staffing constraints? This viewer is basically saying that if you were full-time, there would be more oversight. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's necessarily so, because at least for the Senate, we already have these special sessions where we approve and confirm, various boards and commissions. And those various boards and commissions, we have hearings and we question them as to what it is that they are overseeing as it is, So if, I know that the public sees only snapshots, what they see in the news. But as far as the budget hearings, they start way before session starts. And when I talk about going to the various districts, if you look at our WAM chair or our FIN chair, they have visits to the various districts, and at those meetings, they do talk about their budgets. They do talk about their wants. They do talk about those lapses. So there is oversight already. There could be more. There could be less. That's what I was trying to say, is although you see us at only 60 days, The reality is we do work year-round, and the good thing about the 60 days is we do have a deadline where we need to fish or cut bait, where we need to make decisions, where budgets need to pass so that there is certainty with the nonprofits, with the various departments as to what they need to budget for the next 2 years.
And do you agree that basically having the pressure of a deadline makes it more productive?
Exactly. And the forefathers said there's 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judiciary. This particular full-time for Hawaii, which is a small state, is putting the legislative branch on steroids. We will then be oversight, looking everybody, kind of flexing our muscles. I mean, we are equal branches of government right now. And when the good senator says that, hey, you know, we are able to put better legislation out there, you tell the people of Hawaii that 64% pay increase was because you guys meet full time, people are going to say, better that you meet less of the time to have better legislation. Let's be very frank. The approval rating of the Hawaii State Legislature is 18%. To say we're going to go full time and get more approval rating because people are going to like it, they wanted it, as I said earlier, term limits. We didn't give them that. We gave them. We tend to function not close enough to the legislation and the constituents, as the senator from the Big Island said, because sometimes we are preoccupied with things that are not important. So my sense is, if we did have a full-time legislature, the quality wouldn't go up, just the quantity of hours and going through the motions.
Interesting.
If I could just chime in on the staffing issue and also the balance of powers issue. You know, this has been one of the greatest challenges for myself as a legislator. Nowhere in our proposals do we, call for an increase in legislator pay. But the reality is, because the legislature is so-called part-time, our staff are paid on a part-time basis. They do not make a living wage, even the year-round staff. I have 2 year-round staff, I have 2 session staff, none of them can afford to have a car. And I don't expect that any of them see legislative staff as years, if not decades-long career. And as a result, we simply don't have the institutional knowledge, the institutional expertise that needs to be built up over a period of years. If I have a question, I can only really ask either a lobbyist or the executive branch agencies, which cedes an incredible amount of power to those 2 entities because they're the ones who have been around a long time. They're the ones who are, doing the work all year round. I think that when the legislature meets for only a few months out of the year, when it chooses to pay its own staff at such a low level that they're not going to build up institutional knowledge and expertise, we are ceding that accountability and oversight role that the founding framers of our constitutional system have given to us. And indeed, the framers of the United States Constitution provided for a year-round Congress, which does meet year-round, as do the legislatures of 11 states, as do the county councils of all 4 counties of Hawaii. And so, there are advantages and there are disadvantages. None of these are perfect institutions, but I really do think as a member of the legislative branch that we could be a lot more effective if we had the resources at our disposal, the staff expertise at our disposal.
Well, Judith, I'd love for you to weigh in on what the senators just said, and also Marilyn from Kāhala is writing in saying, I am shocked to learn they are only in session 60 days out of the year. This is not enough time to consider the proposed bills. Do they even have a living salary? We know that, as you mentioned, the lawmakers are paid over $70,000 for
$72,000 actually.
$72,000 to be precise, for that work. But as you mentioned, the staff are not making nearly that much. Judith, what are your thoughts about what the senator has just brought up?
Most of the small and medium-sized states do pretty much the same thing as we do. They either have 30, 60, sometimes 90 days, either measured in calendar days or legislative days in which to work, and then special sessions to address. But if you look at it, very many of them frequently, almost regularly, run special sessions as well. So basically they are operating more than 60 days, and we often are running special sessions as well. I guess from a planning standpoint, I think if you were at the Capitol for the same amount of time but spread over the entire year, it argues for what you're saying, that you would have staff that in between those times, that during those recesses or short recesses, you would have opportunity to consult with your staff, consult with professionals, get expertise from outside to be able to make a more careful approach to each analysis, including the analysis for how it's going to have a long-term and short-term fiscal impact on our state. So I can see an advantage to having a more orderly and less compressed way of approaching it. But to the individual's question, yes, they only meet for 60 days. It is a sprint. They hit the ground running and it goes fast, 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 fast. And if you are wanting to comment on bills, you have to watch very carefully. You have to make sure that you are putting yourself on the right list. You make sure that you are seeing the right committee meetings that are coming up, that you are preparing and having those inputs in time. And I think for people like myself who are retired, that's possible, I can do that. But for the regular school teacher who wants to comment, or the regular nurse who wants to comment, you don't have a runway. You don't have much time at all to be prepared to comment on a bill that's coming up quickly. So you have to actually stay at the same pace that they are working at. And congratulations, because you guys work really hard when you're working. Well, I don't know what you do on your off time, but boy, you work hard when you're working. But for the rest of us, it's hard to keep up. It's hard to know it's hard to stay in front of what's demanded if you want to be active in it.
Well, and you brought up the point about special sessions, and this caller does too. Ella in Waikiki says, why are special sessions not called more frequently? Do you think increasing the use of special sessions could offer similar benefits to year-round legislature? Senator, I know that, when the governor calls a special session, there's always a lot of concerns about the cost, and so that would seem to me the reason that we're not using special sessions more than we are. What do you think about adding more special sessions to sort of supplement and achieve some of the things that Senator Chang is talking about?
So there's two types of special sessions. I think the most common one is you're thinking about the bicameral special session, and that is super expensive because it requires the House to also be in session along with the Senate. The Senate always has special sessions because we need to confirm judges, we need to confirm directors, and we need to confirm various department heads and the like. So that's why I'm saying at least for the Senate, we're almost full-time anyway. It's one of those things that we need to, special sessions can be called by the governor, it can also be called bicamerally. And we have done it before, and we can do it again, especially if it's something big. And in fact, there's two major issues that's coming down the pike because of the Maui fires, where we may need to call special session, one of which is the huge insurance issue, and also Hawaiian Electric, as well as, other issues concerning the Maui wildfire. So we may see a bicameral special session this year.
Well, Senator Chang, before we move off this point, what do you think about utilizing special sessions more frequently to achieve some of the goals, as opposed to actually instituting a full-scale change?
I think special sessions have their place, but it's hard to call the legislature into special session unless you have a predetermined outcome, because nobody wants to be called into special session and then have whatever bill that's being worked on, die because of disagreements. And again, special sessions are limited in their time. Nobody wants to keep running up the clock and the expenses. If the legislature were meeting continuously year-round, it could respond much more quickly to issues like the wildfires in Maui that happened in August. Or we wouldn't need to, gut and replace bills to address, a volcano that erupts in May of 2018 on the Big Island, or flooding on Kauai that happens, and East Oahu in our districts. In April of 2018, there was just another, flooding event on Kauai. But we can't do anything about that now. And even if we were to call ourselves into a special session, we don't know how much time we would need to address any of these issues. It would just be easier and more predictable for everybody if everyone knew that the legislature were going to be meeting periodically throughout the entire year.
Representative Ward, what about yes, yeah, and also I would love you to respond to what Judith was saying about the burden that places on constituents and those who want to testify, that that the lawmakers are moving at such a rapid clip that it can be very difficult to participate, given that if you have a regular job.
First off, the special sessions are a safety valve. Anything that's worthwhile that supposedly we don't look at. And by the way, it's not 60 days, it's 4 months. People get the wrong impression. 60 days is like, oh my God, you guys meet 2 months out of the year and you get $72,000. It's 4 months. So when you use 60 days, it's a little bit deceptive. And what was the question?
What about this idea that because the session is so tight and that the citizens don't get to participate in the way that they could?
Contraire. It's tight, but we have Zoom. Now, anybody in any part of the world, particularly the neighbor islands, and I think the best thing that came out of COVID was for the democratic process to be for anybody, as long as they have a computer with a way of clicking on a URL, Zoom. We have made participation so easy, and you can follow a bill through the legislative website. The participation is so easy, but I know the expectation is that it's going to increase participation. It hasn't, and I think by some of the comments you're hearing, Zoom hasn't helped. It is immensely added to the democratic participation in the process. So I don't think having longer time is going. They don't have to fly in anymore. So if you meet year-round, I think that is going to be kind of a zero-sum game. I just don't believe it's going to happen.
Well, you brought up Zoom, and there's a caller who says, I can see Representative San Buenaventura's point about being close to her constituents, but has there been any talk about changing the rules to allow virtual meetings and attendance from neighbor island lawmakers? Tell us a little bit about that.
It only happened during Zoom.
During the pandemic.
During the pandemic. I'm sorry, during the pandemic. During the pandemic. No, we were required to actually stay, to actually be present for the session. And in fact, even majority caucus sometimes were required to actually be physically present. But I agree with Judith that the time period for participation for witnesses is short. But I just want to remind her, as long as everyone else, there are 3 readings. And in the House, whenever it goes to every committee, there are multiple chances to have a say. And, we get flooded by emails all the time. And it's not just those who have testified who we hear to. And good example of that is the death of the 2 animal bills in the Senate. And that was probably the result of the flood of emails we were getting. So there is participation.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. There's a caller from Hawaii who has a question, and Senator Chang, I'd love for you to take this one. How much will legislators make if they go full time? And just a remark here, $72,000 for a part-time job, although our 2 representatives here would kind of counter that it's not a part-time job, saying that's more than teachers make. But to the first point, how much would lawmakers make if they did go full time?
Well, I agree that teachers should be paid more, but what lawmakers make is not tied to the length of the legislative session or whether it's concentrated in 4 months or spread out over 12. That's up to the Salary Commission, at least in our proposals. And I believe that, legislators, staff members in the legislature, all public servants should be, their pay should be determined in a transparent process, and that certainly wouldn't change just because the session days are concentrated or spread out.
So would there be no cost increase to going year round?
I think that staff should be paid more. So I do think that cost would probably, I would like it to go up. I would be open to legislative salaries going up, but that's not something any of our proposals have required. But I think, in some ways, this is a system where you get what you pay for. And if you like a system where, you only have 48 hours to notice before a bill is heard, and if you like a system where, bills die, the animal bills that my friend Senator San Buenaventura were referring to, they could very well have been kept going if we had a continuous session where all the stakeholders understood that there was more time to address the concerns. But because there wasn't time, that was, I think, one of the main reasons. There was this, because it had a so-called clean date. If the Senate acted and passed the bill, it would have gone straight to the governor's desk. Well, there didn't have to be that level of urgency if we had more time to say, hey, let's take a break, let's reconsult with the stakeholders, and let's come back a couple of months later. So I think that, if you want a cheap but chaotic process, that's certainly what we have. If you want a truly deliberative process with thoughtful engagement that's not rushed by artificial deadlines, then, and if that costs more, then I think that's what the taxpayers deserve.
Representative Ward, I can see your issue.
May I throw out some data? Ian, by the way, we're not a cheap process, not from my constituents' point of view. The highest paid full-time legislature is New York, 142,000. California, the next highest paid, 122,000. On the average, full-time legislators in various states make $82,358. Hybrid states make an average of 41,000. Part-time legislatures make $18,449. So we're in the professional category at 72,000, but most part-time, and get a load of this one, there's no pay for New Mexico legislators. They get a per diem of $85 a day. No pay, zero. They get, when you're traveling or when you're in session. And New Hampshire gets $100 a year. So we are not cheap and lazy or inefficient. We're professional. But compared to other places, I think we're doing quite well as a partner.
Well, there are very significant cost of living differences between New Mexico and here.
Oh, yeah, of course.
As well as transportation costs, et cetera, et cetera. But can I go back to the issue of cost? One other aspect of the bill says that senators or legislators would be prohibited from holding other jobs. Now, first of all, I think that there is a significant reason to have that. In all the states where the legislature is relatively long running or year-round, it is true that they are prohibited from holding other positions. Now, we have just taken a really bad black eye from the expose that was released yesterday from Civil Beat and the New York Times about legislative corruption. And one of the things that was looked at in there is double dipping, and prohibiting legislators from holding other jobs would at least address one of the egregious issues that was brought up in that expose. So if you're going to ask people to work year-round, which you are already doing, to do a good job for the legislature, then it makes sense to prohibit them from working in other jobs, or at least I feel that it does, and I feel it's an honest way to look at it. Now that means you would probably have to pay them, you would have to compensate them appropriately given where we live and the professional level that would be attached to that responsibility.
Senator Chang, do you think that that would help with the, the kind of limits that she's talking about?
I do. I think that if you have a system where you're paying a legislator $100 a year, you're either going to get only the very rich, running for office, or those who have to find other work, possibly exposing themselves to the temptations of, corruption or conflicts of interest. And if you want a legislature that is accountable to the people and to no one else, then I think that that's a clear advantage to having, a prohibition on outside work.
But then if you're in the legislature for the money, you're in the wrong profession. In other words, it may attract people because the salary is $100,000 or $120,000. And I think that's the wrong motivation to be in the legislature, quite frankly. Not that we're all hair shirts, but I don't think the salary should be, it should be a livable kind of salary, but if it's too high, it becomes elite and it becomes a magnet for people. Hey, I'm running to office, I'm making like the city council.
Well,
They're making
but
big bucks.
arguably, though, if you have this as a part-time, there's only a certain number of jobs that will let you work.
Oh, I'm talking about the full-time.
Well, no, but I'm saying in its current iteration, there are only a certain number of people who can do that. If you are a restaurant worker, you can't say, well, I'm going to take the next 4 months off to be a lawmaker, and then I'll come back and wait tables after that. You know, so there presumably is a point that in its current iteration, it only draws the elite as well.
Or the highly motivated, because if you're in the legislature for the money, you're in the wrong profession. That's basically
that may be true.
It's the wrong place.
But you
to
do
be.
have to be highly motivated, and you have to
Exactly.
be capable
to help
of
the people in the state of Hawaii. It's about them. It's not about us.
Absolutely. But you also have to make a living wage. I mean, people can't run for office and be impoverished by it. That's not fair. So you do a professional job. I don't resent that we pay our taxes to pay you to do that. That's where I am with that.
Senator, I wonder if you could weigh in on this and just the idea that perhaps we could eradicate conflict of interest to a higher level if lawmakers were full-time and could therefore not do other jobs.
That's obvious. So yes, I agree with that. And in fact, my law practice basically went down to zero because although I thought at the time when I ran that I would be able to run it as well as be a legislator. The reality is it's a policy that the public needs to make. If we want to have professional legislators, then full-time, and ban them from working. But if we want citizen legislators, citizens who are able to provide their manao as to what the day-to-day working people do and face, then you got to allow them to work to work like regular people. That way they know what regular people feel, what regular people suffer, what regular people having to commute the 4 hours a day or so and go into bumper-to-bumper traffic instead of being stuck in that square building. I mean, it's a policy that the public needs to decide. And right now, the public has decided that citizen legislators who are able to know what working people are feeling, are suffering the consequences or benefiting from the consequences of the various laws we make should be legislators at this time. And if the public says that they want professional legislators, then I guess that's what we are going to be faced with. Like I said, I ran for office because I wanted a legislature that knew what day-to-day people are feeling, what they benefit from, what the consequences of our laws are to them. And I believe I've done that because as a country lawyer, with family law attorney, with people who go through divorces, adoptions, guardianships, trusts, wills, estate planning, coming into my office, I know what the problems are. And a big example, okay, is how difficult it is to just get a copy of a marriage certificate or a death certificate. Until you are faced with having had to do a probate and not be able to start a probate or not be able to manage the estate of somebody who has died because you are waiting 6 months for a death, you don't realize how much bills have piled up that you can't pay until probate has started. So one of the things I did as being part of the health committee was make it a little bit easier. And that wasn't asked for by any advocate. But when I saw the bill come in, I asked the health chair to fix the statute to make it a little bit easier so that we are able to expedite marriage certificates and death certificate requests so that it's easier for day-to-day people to go about their business. And you're not going to have that if you have professional legislators. That's what I'm saying.
I completely agree. Oh, sorry. I completely agree with you in terms of the concept of a community legislator, of a citizen legislator is really right there, exactly as you described. You bring the understanding, you bring the needs, you bring all of that to the table. But you yourself are now a professional legislator. You have brought all of your history and all of your background to the table and have now become professional bringing that citizenship forward. I think we want people who come from the community. We want people who know their community. We want people who have a feeling for what's driving people nuts. We have a feeling for the things that are working and the things that aren't working, and bring it to the legislature, just like you are talking about right there. But I also think we need to recognize that what you are doing is professional. What you're doing requires knowledge beyond what the average person walking around on the street has. And that professionalism is a side of the role that I think we need to acknowledge as well. That's all I'm saying.
And Senator Chang, sort of building on what she was just saying, do you think that the current idea of the citizen legislature is in fact true? Do we have the diversity that was intended with this part-time system?
We do have a lot of diversity in our legislature. We have lawyers like Senator Buenaventura. We have folks who are in the Peace Corps like Representative Ward. We have, one of our colleagues is a rancher. One of our colleagues is a sweet potato farmer. They run the gamut. But there are certain specific categories of people that aren't necessarily at the table. If you're, a low-income worker and the legislature is not paying a wage sufficient to raise a young family like the one I have, you're not even going to consider running for office. You're going to either, sort of be relying on people who are financially secure and who don't know how hard it is for our young people, our working families to get by, or for whom those experiences were a lifetime ago. And so, when I started, I was certainly a young legislator. I've since aged out of the Young Democrats, but I really strongly believe that we need more young voices at the table, and young people are the least likely to be able to afford to accept a $100 a year position.
There's Ellie in Kaneohe. We only have about 10 minutes left, but I do want to get to a few more of your questions.
Just got started.
I know. That's how it goes. It goes so quickly. Judith, can you take this one from Ellie in Kaneohe? In addition to the options discussed, one suggestion is to have one legislative entity rather than the House and Senate. What do you think about that?
Actually, League proposed that at one time in the past, actually, the very, very distant past, and I believe it was not accepted. I think I would have to defer to you all about that. It seems to me redundant, but I'm an outsider, to have to go through all of those processes. I know at the federal level we have a very historical reason for doing it that way, but I'm not sure that at the state level it has the same logic behind it. So I think it might work that way. It might work as a unicameral organization just as well as it does as bicameral, but I would leave it to your
Senator
opinions.
Sloan introduced the unicameral year after year. I don't know, Stanley, if you ever saw that when Senator was still alive, but he loved that. I think it's Oklahoma or one of the other states. He said, that's the model. Get us all together, make the decisions, don't go through all this back and forth. Because the real competition, as we near the end of it, is between the House and the Senate. It's not the Republicans and the Democrats, which, by the way, is a structural thing, is why we don't have the right things going on in the legislature. It's 8 to 68. 8 Republicans, 68 Democrats. Now tell me you're not going to have some difficulties with that when you have basically an adversarial system. It's generally one side to the other. So structurally, we are so out of balance, which we were 100 years ago. The Republicans ran and owned everything. Now it's where the Democrats own and run everything. So that is a structural variable, which is kind of a big elephant in the room, which I wanted to mention. But otherwise, Sam Sloan wanted to do that. But I think we are reluctant to change, to give up a Senate or a House seat to do something which may or may not really add to the productive advantage of it. So it's a great idea, but I don't think anybody's going to really back it up. I didn't realize that you guys had done that.
Senator Chang, you know,
1984 was history, real history.
this concept seems to come up repeatedly and really not get a lot of traction. How realistic do you think it is for this to actually happen, and what would it take?
Well, it certainly won't happen overnight. And I think it's great that we're all here today because, as you can see, there's a variety of opinions on this topic within the legislature itself. We discuss good government reforms that are proposed by League of Women Voters or Common Cause or even just our, rank and file constituents year after year, like term limits, like, public financing of elections. Some of them get enacted. Like we have, a sunshine law that we didn't apply to ourselves, but that does apply to our county councils. We did ban fundraising during session. But in my opinion, having been on both the Honolulu City Council as well as the Hawaii State Legislature, the single change that we could make that would make the biggest difference when it comes to transparency, accessibility to the public, and predictability would be to shift from this artificial, arbitrary 4-month system to a year-round system. I think those of us who have worked with or in the county councils as well as the state legislature would probably share that consensus opinion, that there's more time, there's more deliberation, there's more thoughtful deliberation. And so I don't think that this type of a program would happen overnight. It would require a constitutional amendment, or I believe it should. I believe a question of this magnitude should be put before the voters of Hawaii. But if we are serious about promoting thoughtful deliberation and careful lawmaking, I think that this would be the single biggest change that we could make.
Senator Buenaventura, we only have a few minutes left, but I would love to hear your final thoughts on this. I know that you disagree with the senator here.
Yes.
The reality is I represent a rural district, and I do not like being stuck in Honolulu in an artificial, and to me artificial because it is very different from Puna. And to be stuck, to be advocated by various lobbyists from Honolulu, rather than my going to my district and being at my district and knowing what the day-to-day problems of my community is. And if we have a year-round system, it is very difficult for somebody like me to know what the day-to-day problems are, because I'm not commuting to and from work, fighting the traffic, knowing the problems that a certain right turn lane has screwed up with the traffic of the other people going the other side, because I'm stuck here in Honolulu. And that is my main problem. We are citizen legislatures, and it does require a constitutional amendment. It does require the public to do the shift. And until we decide that we are not going to have a citizen legislator, we're going to have professional legislators, then that's a different discussion.
Okay. Representative Ward, what are your thoughts? Do you think this will ever happen?
Bottom line, I'm against it unless the people demand that it's there. I think it doesn't belong to us to decide. It belongs to the people out there. So, and it's too costly. And the value added, Stanley, with all due respect, I don't see the advantages. Interestingly, we're kind of like against and a pro. You've sort of separated us very
That was not
intuitively.
intentional.
But it's where, look, if there's a constitutional amendment and the people say they want that, okay, but what they're going to get out of it, if they know the data and what you get out of what you're going to pay for, it's going to cost us 3 times the amount of money. Salaries will go up from 72 probably to 100 something. And right now we have an 18% approval rating, and to be there longer, we may even go worse rather than higher in terms of the eyes of the public. But again, term limits, where everybody wants it, we won't touch it. And you say, well, we're going to be open to more input from the public. Well, no, there's a lot of things that we don't even listen to the public, and it's structurally in such a way.
Judith, I want to give you the last word in the last
Well,
minute
I want
and
to
a
say
half that
I'm
we
not
have left.
entirely pro. I think there are pro and con aspects to this. But I do think that one of the most important things is we have to pay attention to what the effects would be on representatives from the other islands, because it is too easy to get Honolulu-centric. It's too easy to get Oahu-centric. It's just a natural case when you are here all the time and this is what you think about. But I think that a slower and more deliberative process has its enormous advantages. Now, whether this is the way to institute it or whether there are other ways that it could be instituted, I can't say for sure. But I think that there are definitely some advantages to slowing down, thinking things through, having a less chaotic process, especially towards the end of the sessions. So that's where I will land.
And Judith, you did say that, you know, there is such a burden on people who want to participate, but for those folks who are watching and who do want to participate, you know, what do you think the best way is to do that?
Well, they can get in touch with League. We would be happy to have them. But the Public Information Office at the state capitol does an amazing job of helping you understand how to participate, how to testify, how to understand what bills are coming up. And it's just a great office. So, and it's very easy to find.
And they have a website.
And that's
That's right. They have a website.
That's a wonderful way to end our evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. Mahalo to you also at home for joining us. And we, of course, do thank our guests, Republican Representative Jean Ward and Democratic Senator Joy San Buenaventura, and Democratic Senator Stanley Chang and Judith Mills Wong from the League of Women Voters of Hawaii. No insights next week. Instead, a town hall on something we all experience, stress. Whether it's personal, professional, financial, or just all that traffic out on the road, we all feel it. But too much stress can be harmful to your health. So what can we all do? Join us for Kāko, Hawaii's Town Hall, De-Stressing in a Stressful World. Please join us then. I'm Yunji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo.